All right, welcome back, Inebri-arts. This is Andy of the Inebri-art podcast, and we are back again at the Craft Beer Cellar on Main Street in Plymouth. Sometimes you have to just throw out a Facebook post and hope someone bites, because we had a super last-minute cancellation. And Alison O'Leary.
Very good.
See? I got the name right the second time around. Was just kind of hit me up. So you're an author.
I am.
And that's pretty much all I know. So let's get into it. What have you written? Let's start with there.
I have 3 books right here in front of me. One is the Appalachian Mountain Club's Best Day Hikes Near Boston. One is called Inns and Adventures, which is a travelogue of northern New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, and the Berkshires. And the third is So Close to Home, which is a World War II history, a very unusual aspect of World War II that not many people know about.
So that's quite a jump in subject matter.
Yes, it is.
Why the 2 different subjects?
Well, it's a matter of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What came to me, what projects were presented to me as available, and I grabbed what I could.
Oh,
Yeah.
So someone came to you with the...
Yeah, I write with Michael Togus, who's a well-known author in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things, he co-wrote The Finest Hours, the story of the Coast Guard's greatest small boat rescue off of Chatham in 1952.
Oh, okay.
And that became a Disney movie in 2016. It was filmed locally in Norwell and Chatham and Quincy.
It had Ben Affleck in it. And
Yes,
I had to
yeah,
Google it
Ben
today.
Affleck and Chris Pine.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could remember the woman's name. She was very good, but a British actress.
So did you always want to be a writer, or is this something just kind of fell into? Or
It was the only thing I was good at.
Yeah.
So I was a journalist. I am still a journalist. I wrote for the Boston Globe for a number of years. I edited some magazines up in the Boston area for several years. And this is my 10-year anniversary of getting laid off.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
Yes. I'm celebrating it because I was editor of a woman's magazine.
Okay.
Up in the Boston area. It was called Skirt Magazine, Skirt Boston. We had a blast doing it, but it was a horrible time to launch a new magazine. 2007.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. By 2009, we ran out of gas.
Yep.
They gave us pink slips, and that was 10 years ago, May 2009. And I was like, now what do I do? All I've done is write for, 20-something years.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking around for my next gig, and I worked at a retail store, Eastern Mountain Sports.
Okay.
I, bumped around with a lot of freelance work and stuff, thinking that once the economy improved, I'd get back on my feet. But it took a lot longer than I expected. And along the way, I met Mike Togus, my co-author, and he offered me the opportunity to co-write some books with him. And of course, I'm not that dumb that I would pass that up.
Right.
He had an excellent track record of over 20 books at that point. Now he's up to almost 30.
Nice.
Yeah, he's a very, very productive, very motivated author. And he's a great businessman, too. He really took his business acumen and knowledge and applied it to writing books and marketing them.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of came in on the marketing side, helped him out a bit, sending out emails, trying to do publicity for him. And slowly we said, well, look, I think we could publish a book together. So we started out with this one, Inns and Adventures, which is the one about New Hampshire, Vermont, and the Berkshires. And it's about his travels and my travels and our travels together. So there's some hiking, kayaking, a lot of fishing, some really bad mistakes that we made while we were out in the wilderness by ourselves, stupid things that other people should learn from. And we published that, and I actually started a second career at that point as a speaker. Okay. So that's what Mike does, is he travels around and he gives programs on the topics of his books. He does motivational speaking. He speaks to corporate events and conferences and that sort of thing. And I'm a rung lower since I'm just starting out. So I speak on the topics of my 3 books now, and I do sort of a slideshow.
Yeah.
So I go to libraries, historical societies, outdoors groups, ski clubs, that sort of thing. And I do these books according to what they want to hear.
So I don't think we've ever had anyone on that has co-authored it. Is that more challenging to write a book in conjunction with someone else?
And establish and continue our relationship,
Yeah.
No, it wasn't especially difficult. It's actually a huge bonus for me as an unknown in the publishing world to have his name on the book.
Right.
Frankly, his name brings the cachet, gets the attention, and then they go, oh, she's not stupid. Thank goodness, most of the time anyway.
And then if they're like, I didn't really like this part of the book, be like, oh, he wrote that.
Yeah, precisely, yes. Yeah. So no, it worked out very, very well, and it was an interesting transition for me from writing newspaper articles and profiles of people for magazine articles to doing a full-length book, because it's the same process, but just on steroids.
Right.
So I got to learn from him how he goes about it and his method of organizing and keeping notes and that sort of thing, because that's really, really important. You don't want to fly by the seat of your pants, because there are a lot of people reading the books and saying, wait a minute, this is wrong. They can't wait to tell you if there's a typo in your book. People are all over that.
Someone who spells very poorly, I understand.
Right. So being very, very accurate and precise with your notes and your facts is so important, of course, when you publish a book. So I learned an awful lot from co-authoring with him. And I certainly took orders from him. He said, you're going to write this chapter and I'll write that chapter. And I said, fine. So that's the way it worked out.
Is it harder to co-write, because the Inns and Adventures and your hiking book are more, I'm making assumptions because I've just met you, so I haven't had a chance to read them, are more, I don't know if factual is the right word that I'm looking for, but more informational? Was it harder to write the World War II story where you'd have to connect the chapters more?
That's a really good question, and you're 99% right, because if somebody were to take, say, the hiking book and we screwed something up, they could be lost and dying on a mountain somewhere. We wouldn't want that to happen. We wouldn't want to be responsible for that. And it is true that the chapters are sort of standalone in those books, where you're writing about one town's history and things to do in that town, or about one river where you can kayak or something. So you're absolutely right in that way. But the World War II book had its own challenges because we bring 2 different voices to the writing, so to speak. My style is a little bit different from his. There was the challenge of sort of blending it so that the reader didn't realize, oh, wait a minute, somebody different wrote this chapter.
One voice?
Yes.
Yeah.
One voice. And Mike's objective is always to make things move quickly. That he feels is his trademark.
Okay.
So his books, he's written 6 survival at sea books, true Coast Guard rescue books. And The Finest Hours was among them.
Was he in the Coast Guard?
No, he wasn't.
Oh, okay.
No.
I just assumed he was.
Right. No, it was just a rich vein of stories. And so his books are all very fast-paced and exciting. And he knew that with the World War II book, there was the danger of getting too deep into the history and the arcane information and losing the reader because it wasn't moving fast enough. So that was his charge to me, was change your writing style a little bit, because I'm going to be the slow one, right? And keep it fast-paced and keep the reader very engrossed. I meet a lot of his readers. We go to a lot of events together where he's speaking, because I help him set up and things like that. And a lot of his readers say, I never read a book all the way through in one setting until I picked up this book of yours. And that's such a compliment.
Right.
There are unfortunately, a lot of people who get burned out trying to read books, and they're picking the wrong ones or the wrong authors, and they feel like, ugh, all books are like this. It's drudgery. I'm never going to read again. I'd rather watch TV or something, or listen to podcasts.
This Kafka guy is slow.
Right. So Mike's books, that's his trademark of keeping them moving, and that was part of the challenge with this, was to make our two voices blend together so that it sounded like the same person telling the story, and to keep it rolling.
Did you find him picking up some of your traits in order to kind of also keep the same tone? Like, did it go both ways, or were you more, where he was the more established author, were you more?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that there was a lot of give and take. And, there were times where I wanted to get more into the facts and a little deeper into the history and even the technical aspects of things. Like, a lot of it is about German submarines from World War II. And you can get in as deep as you want because there were 800 of them. And there were many different classes and models and all sorts of arcane information that you could get into. And I thought a certain amount was very important to keep that technical writer, the person with some previous experience or knowledge of the submarines, hooked for the story itself, as well as to keep the reader who was just casually interested in this weird part of American history hooked through the technical parts. So it's a really fine line that you have to play on.
What is the story about?
I'm so glad you asked.
Let's
get to that now.
Yeah,
the title of the book, again, is So Close to Home, and the subtitle is A True Story of an American Family's Fight for Survival During World War II. So we had someone approach Mike, actually, because he's, again, well-known as a survival-at-sea author, and said, I met this guy who has the most incredible story of something that happened to him during World War II. And Mike said, no, you know what? I'm done writing ocean survival stories. I'm moving on to something new. So thanks, but no thanks. And fortunately, he persisted. The man persisted and said, really, I think you'd be interested. Would you hear him out? I'll take you out to dinner. So we all went out to dinner together. And there was this very dignified, elegant-looking older man seated across the table from us, and he was very friendly through dinner and everything. And at the end, he sort of pushed his plate aside and said, now I'm going to tell you my story. And he had this sweet South Texas drawl that sucked me in. About the third word, I was just hanging on everything he could say. And it turns out he was 8 years old in 1942. His family was aboard a freighter ship coming north from South America, and they did not know that German submarines had been unleashed on the east coast of the United States as soon as the U.S. entered the war. So this January 1942, the subs were all over the east coast sinking ships, right up to the shoreline.
Yeah.
I mean, they were on top of us. And his family had no idea. So this is May of 42. They're coming north from South America. They get into the Gulf of Mexico, and the ship's captain decides to divert because something was seen, something suspicious in the water. And he could not use his radio because that was forbidden during the wartime because the subs could find you very easily. So they diverted to Corpus Christi, Texas. They were told they couldn't stay in port there and that they should continue on their way to New Orleans. And so they left Corpus Christi, and within 12 hours they were sinking because a German submarine found them and sent a couple of torpedoes into the hull of the ship. Wow. So, to hear the whole story, I will be at Plymouth Library in the fall. We haven't nailed down a date yet, but I do a whole program on So Close to Home with call it a slideshow, if you will. I like to say multimedia because it's a little sexier.
Yeah.
But vintage pictures of the ships and the people involved. We were able to get a hold of the war diaries of the German sub-captains.
Oh, wow.
So we knew exactly what they were doing, where they were located, what ships they were sinking. as their paths intersected with the path of the family on the freighter.
Yeah, I think that's like one of those parts of World War II that most people have no idea how close to home it was. I mean, at one point, I think there was even a Japanese fighter shot down in Alaska somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most people think of it as a war that didn't happen here, but
precisely, yes.
You know,
yes.
It did.
Well, we like to embrace that myth that we're untouchable,
right?
Because we were so far from the action, except for Hawaii, of course. But that's not true at all, because the subs were so advanced that they actually brought spies and saboteurs right to Long Island, New York, dropped a bunch of them off on the beach. Jacksonville, Florida, dropped a bunch more off on the beach, and these people went to destroy some of our plants, the aluminum and rubber plants, so that we could not develop the machinery we needed for the war.
Now, when you write a book like this, how much? I mean, it's got to be an immense amount of research. Like
it was. We have a giant bibliography in the back that we felt was necessary, but also interesting to people. Of all the books that we, I believe it's in here. Oh, here it is. Looking at the wrong page, thinking, oh my God, this one doesn't have a bibliography. So we had lots of family letters. We read a lot of books. There were many German sub-captains who survived the war, including the Admiral of the German Navy, Karl Donitz, who was a really interesting character, and we write a lot about him. He survived the war. He was not convicted as a war criminal in the Nuremberg trials, so he continued to live after the war. He was the only commander in the German forces who didn't hang.
Right.
So that just adds to how interesting this story is. So we had his memoirs to pull information from for this book.
How long does it take to do all that research and get it into a story format? I feel like it would take years.
Well, we were so immersed in it and enjoyed it so much. And I think here the partnership benefited both of us, because we were just egging one another on. Look what I found today. Oh my God, check this out. And I was sort of the one on the internet looking up things, sort of my wish list of information I'd like to find, and really digging for it. And he was the one with a huge stack of books, reading old style, the memoirs and history books about it. But there really haven't been very many books written about this aspect of the war from an American perspective, and none with a family involved.
Yeah.
None at all. So it's unique in that way, and we're very proud of it. It's been received very, very well, including by some very picky historians.
Oh, yeah.
And that's hard to do.
Oh, yeah, because any little, especially in this day and age, everybody wants to shoot stuff full of holes.
Exactly. They're looking for the flaws in your argument and in your historic research. And we were, very particular about what we chose to write about and how we did it. But, it didn't take as long as you might imagine, because we had the family's story to tell.
Yeah.
And that kept us on track. We didn't want to stray too far from what was going on with them. And that kept us moving forward. We added all the U-boat stuff. And then when we found the war diaries of the U-boat captains, we were able to alternate chapters between the captains or the U-boats and the family aboard the freighter ship. So it progressed very naturally. There was a natural ending to it. Our young boy who we met at dinner that night, who told us his story, actually had this surprise twist to his ending that we were so delighted to find out about. He was drafted into the NBA.
Really?
He holds scoring records for University of Texas at Austin men's basketball 60 years after graduation.
Wow.
And he was followed by Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
So Kevin Durant didn't even break his single-season scoring record. This guy is a god in the pantheon of Texas sports, which is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Yeah. So we were just thrilled. Plus, he was so easy to work with. He had several family members who were super helpful, and we could call them and say, do you remember this? How did that go? And, who said what here? And all of that. So we felt very comfortable nailing down the facts that we used in the book.
Is there any little factoid that you feel is missing that you couldn't find, or like some journal or some bit of information that eluded you that you wanted to include that you couldn't seem to trace down?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we were hoping to find more about the background of the primary U-boat captain. Mm-hmm. And we were unable to find anything about whether he had a family, because he was 29 when he took command of the U-boat.
Wow, really? That seems super young to me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it really was. But, you consider it. He went to the German equivalent of the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
So when you graduate from the Naval Academy, you can be in charge of a company, not a platoon, not a squadron, but a company. And that's about the size of a U-boat crew, 50. And that's age 24, 25. So 29, he would go to sea 3 months at a time with 50 men under his command. And they respected him. He was a very hard-working guy. But I was digging and could not find anything about his past or about his family, any family members he left behind, whether he got married, anything like that. But there are many reasons why Germany has very strict laws on privacy of personal records like that. You have to be a direct relative.
Yeah.
And also, we bombed the living daylights out of Germany.
Right. So there's not a lot left.
A lot of the records went up in smoke during the war. I did try. That sort of remains that, holy grail that I would love to pursue. But we are considering a spin-off of one chapter into a whole book of World War II history. Yeah, I won't divulge in detail what it's about, but let me tell you, if you read my book, So Close to Home, you may recognize which chapter deserves its own book in a modern telling with the latest research that can be done.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot more records available to us without spending years in a dusty archive somewhere. A lot of things have been digitized.
The search function's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Not just that, but we found people on the internet who were so incredibly helpful. There's a retired Navy captain who lives now a little north of Washington State up in British Columbia.
Yep.
And his name was Jerry Mason. And we found him online because he runs a website called uboatarchive.net. And we got in touch with him and said, hey, we're working on this book. What do you think? Can we find out more about U-boats or whatever? Mm-hmm. And he guided us throughout the process. He has such passion for this topic that he was a tremendous help, never asked for a thing in return, and put us in touch with the War Diaries. Yeah. I had to go to Washington and get them from the National Archives, but when we got them, this was a funny moment. I went down there in the archives, and they're on microfilm, that old plastic reel thing that no kids don't know that they exist. And you have to print out the pages. So I printed out this huge stack of pages, and I was so excited. This was such a breakthrough. I come zipping back to Massachusetts, and I slap it down in front of Mike, and I said, my God, look at this. We've got his War Diaries. And Mike says, that's great. And then we both looked at him and said, oh, crap, they're in German. How is your German? Sprechen Sie Deutsch,
So did you have to have them translated? Or?
We sent them to Jerry Mason, and he translated them. And he was happy because that gave him another set of War Diaries that he didn't have.
Oh, wow.
So he was so helpful. He actually deserves a lot of credit, and we do give it to him in the epilogue of the book or the author's note. He deserves a lot of credit because he was our beta reader. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs testers.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody needs that first audience to sort of tell them, no, this sucks,
it's so important. I know a lot of artists, writers, musicians, whatnot, and they give their work to friends and family, and they're always like, oh, it's great. And that's not real helpful.
Yeah.
You need that honest person. There's a friend of mine, Adam Miller, that when I want an honest critique, I will send him some of my work. Then I usually need a hug afterwards because he's brutal, but in a really good, positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody needs that. I want somebody who'll tear it apart.
Yeah.
Who will absolutely be brutal.
Push it and make it better.
And that's what it was like when I used to write for the Boston Globe.
Yeah.
But these days, it's amazing when you write a book, the editing process is non-existent.
Really?
Yeah, we have, and I've seen Mike now publish probably, oh my goodness, 5, 6 books since I've known him, at a minimum 6 books, maybe more like 9. And every time there are grammatical corrections, there's typo corrections, but nobody digging into the facts and checking things and really going over. Not to say that anything is erroneous about what he's writing, but
even
it's
just someone to go,
crazy.
This chapter's a little slow, or
exactly.
doesn't really seem important to the story. Yeah.
Right. So I'm actually editing a guy's book right now, his manuscript. He was a Coast Guard surfman, which is a very difficult skill to attain, difficult level of Coast Guard proficiency to attain. And I'm editing his book, and that's exactly what I'm doing, because he's had publishers, it's a great story, but he's had publishers pass it up because nobody wants to get into it with him.
Right.
And say, too much of this.
Right.
Cut that out. He needed somebody like me who's going to say, all right, we're moving all the dead bodies to this chapter so the people can skip it if they want to.
Right.
Because he really gets into the dead bodies.
And it's one of those, I find, you mentioned that you worked retail, and I worked retail for a long time, and you train someone new, and I'd always have to, I remember the first day anyone started, I'd be like, if I start speaking in a different language, stop me, because you start speaking that shorthand that you're so accustomed to, and I'm sure Coast Guard, a lot of it, you have to be like, people reading this aren't going to understand what you're saying.
That's true. That's true. Not just that, but he also was stationed in a place that I'm not familiar with, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because he does this sort of shorthand about A jetty and B jetty, and the currents were ripping through this spit, and I'm like, whoa. You got to spell this out differently.
Yeah.
We've got to make it more approachable for the average reader. But I think it will be a great book when it's done.
Now, now that you've co-written books, are you interested in writing your own? No, not your own, because these are your books. On your own, that's the way I should have asked that question. Or is this a format that you really enjoy and that you prefer to work in?
Well, it's not completely for me to decide.
Yeah.
But I am deeply into researching my own book.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years. I really need to move it a little faster. I have been threatened. Mike is going to lock me in his cabin in Vermont this summer where there is no internet, no cell phone service.
That doesn't sound terrible.
Just electricity, enough to power my laptop, and we're going to pound out some chapters of that book so that it's at a state where a publisher can make an educated judgment on where it's going and whether they'll publish it.
Mm-hmm. In this day and age, for authors who are getting started, is it easier or harder? Because now with things like crowdfunding and self-publishing, where you don't necessarily have to go through a publisher, do you think it's easier?
Well, it's certainly easier to walk away with something that looks like a book.
Yeah. But
if you want to sell them, it's just as hard or harder than it ever was before. Because in the business, there are 5 big publishers. They call them the Big 5, believe it or not. And they're sort of the judges of what's good enough to be published for the masses.
Right.
Whereas if you go to Amazon and you publish on demand or print on demand and make your own book, you're going to end up with a whole bunch in your garage that never go anywhere except, Christmas presents to your family and friends. Mm-hmm. And that's fine for a lot of people. It's perfectly fine. But I actually work as a freelance publicist and marketer for authors, and that's something that people don't understand. It takes a lot of patience, and you really have to work through many versions of your book to get the very best version you possibly can to present to a publisher, hoping to get in with one of those Big 5 publishing houses. And they have multiple divisions within them for specialty, romance novels and sci-fi. And so they already know their markets, and they're already getting those books out to those markets. But to get your book in one of their publishing slots is the biggest challenge, but it's worth it if you want to actually sell books and be that kind of an author.
Do you think part of it is if you self-publish, it's easier to put something out that's not necessarily up to the standard that it should be?
I've seen a lot of them.
Yeah, because you don't have the same editors and whatnot. You have your mom being like, no, it's great, put it out.
Right. This is sweet, honey. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and as I said, people like that very unfortunately sort of get sold a bill of goods, and they end up with 750 copies in their garage. It happens all the time because there is no outlet to sell them. Bookstores won't take them.
Right.
And they're stuck. So it's really a matter of patience and work. And I believe that if you have a really compelling story that deserves to be published, you can get it published the right way.
Do you miss the article writing for magazine and newspaper?
Somewhat. I still write for magazines.
Oh, okay. So you still have that kind of...
Yeah, from time to time. I actually, unfortunately, write a tremendous amount of web copy now.
Yeah.
A lot.
That's the way it's going.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's nothing I'm interested in. So it's like, this feels like 9 to 5 instead of like, I'm a freelance writer.
Is there a real big difference between writing an article for newspaper and one for the internet?
Yeah. I felt much more invested as a newspaper writer, as a reporter. My name was on it. And then I would have to go face those people again. Yeah. So if I screwed anything up, I mean, these were people I saw on a weekly basis who had no problem coming up to me and saying, you misquoted me, you misspelled, that sort of thing. So I was very invested in the professionalism, and presenting it accurately and appropriately, etc. Web copy, oh my goodness, I have written, I can't even tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words for one particular company that I work for, on crime in courts. Yeah. I've been writing for them for about 4 years, and it just means nothing to me. It's,
True crime is like super huge right now.
Yeah. It's not my thing.
I don't get it. We actually had an author on that was wrote for a newspaper, New Bedford, and she was a reporter during the New Bedford highway serial killer.
Yeah, I've read about her.
Yeah, great interview, but it just, I don't know.
Now that's different. That's different from what I'm doing. That's fascinating to me, actually.
Oh, really?
To like unravel, what happened, when it happened, and then how the cops maybe found the killer, hopefully.
Yeah. Not in that case.
But the stuff, that I'm doing, unfortunately, is much more bland.
Oh, and more just kind of like what's happening in court, like that.
No, it's more what your criminal record is like, and how an employer can use your criminal record, and how they are not allowed to use your criminal record. And
I'm sorry,
and
I feel bad. You're like, I really don't enjoy writing this stuff. I'm like, ooh, tell me more. I just realized I'm like, wow, it's kind of
I kind of put it out of my mind because it doesn't light my fire.
Yeah. Is there like a genre of book that you want to write in the future, or are you pretty much into the whole historic?
I love history. Yeah. I think there's enough interesting history. When you think of history, you think of like falling asleep in the back of class in high school and throwing spitballs or whatever at your friends. But there are interesting ways to present history and aspects of history that are not boring.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of crazy stuff.
History in school is such a broad brush overview of what's going on. You just never get into any of it.
Right. And that's why nobody ever taught us about U-boats coming to the East Coast and sinking ships within sight of people on the beach.
Yeah. The thing that blew me away recently that I found out, I was listening to a podcast about Harriet Tubman. Mm-hmm. And, everyone knows Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad, but she, went on to command military forces.
Now that I had no idea.
Yeah, it was crazy. I'm like, I did not know that. And it's the amount of things she did beyond just the Underground Railroad was
That's so cool.
Immense. Are you going to correct me, Fish? No. All right. Well, I saw you moving for the mute. He always corrects me when... I may be misquoting that, but no one corrects me. That's a lie. But yeah, just there's so much in history that's fascinating that just we don't get to. That
right.
School year is only so long.
That's true. But also, when you're a little bit older, you appreciate different aspects of history that you certainly they don't touch on in school.
Right.
So there can be all sorts of crazy things. As a matter of fact, one of my hiking books here, this Best Day Hikes Near Boston, which is an Appalachian Mountain Club hiking guide, is pretty straightforward hikes, turn right at the Blue Blaze, etc. There's, rocks or something along the trail. But I've developed a program that I take to libraries, and I talk about the history behind the places where you're hiking. And that's
cool.
Not in the book.
Yeah.
And there's some really cool stories. For instance, there's Burridge Pond, which is right up on the Hanson-Halifax line.
Okay.
And it's a 1,600-acre former cranberry bog site that is a wildlife management area. And mountain bikers enjoy it. But I get into the history of Burridge Pond and what was going on there at the turn of the last century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And the audiences love that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a step beyond what you find in the book. But again, it's history, but it's not boring history. It's very enjoyable history. Another thing is, Massasoit State Park, which is in Taunton, very popular on the South Shore. And how in my program I talk about how they had bog iron in the ground there.
Yeah.
So they dug up the ground, and that's part of the reason why Massasoit is so lumpy and has all those weird hills and stuff. And they channeled the water to run mills. And there was actually a woman back in the 1700s who owned 5,000 acres and ran a forge.
Wow.
1700s.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, So it's a fascinating tidbits of history that the audiences really enjoy and could certainly be a book if I went down that road.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Alison, where can people go online to find out more information about your books?
Well, my website is my first name and last name, Alison O'Leary, ALISONOLEARY.com. And it will tell you when I'm speaking next in the local area. As I said, I think I will be bringing one of my programs to Plymouth Library in the fall. We only just started discussing it, and I wish I could think of the others in the area. I know I'm on the Cape several times in the fall, but I speak at libraries and historical societies and assisted living centers and places like that.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for kind of jumping in here last minute, kind of not knowing what you're walking into. It was fascinating. This was great.
Thank you.
And we'd love to have you back on again sometime.
Next book.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for checking out the podcast. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts on the Inebri-art Podcast Network. There's the Bar Talk. There's Old Colony Cast. There's, of course, the Inebri-art Podcast. And our latest, Retro Redoctopus, a kind of nerd genre podcast that you can check out now, all available on our website at inebri-art.com. And pretty much available everywhere that podcasts are available, on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, all those things. And if you don't see it where you're looking, let us know. We'll try to get onto that as well. And you can also email us at inebri-art@yahoo.com with your questions, complaints, and suggestions. And also, if you could take the time to rate and review us on iTunes, that would be phenomenal. That helps us get more exposure and bring more of these great podcasts to your ears. And thanks again for listening.